Something big is happening behind closed doors, something that could change the balance of power in North America forever. At first glance, it might just look like another oil story. But when you start connecting the dots, Alberta's growing independence streak, Washington's sudden interest in Western energy, and Ottawa's uneasy silence, it starts to feel like much more than that. Over the past few weeks, there have been quiet meetings, unusual travel schedules, and a string of cryptic statements from both sides of the border. None of it adds up until you realize who's really at the center of it all. Donald Trump and Alberta. The whispers began after a seemingly routine U.S. Canada trade meeting was abruptly postponed. Officials blamed scheduling conflicts, but insiders started noticing something odd. Alberta's premier's office had been in communication with senior members of Trump's energy team. And not through Ottawa. That's where things start to get interesting. Imagine this for a moment, an American president sitting in the Oval Office, reaching out not to the Canadian Prime Minister, but to a province. It's almost unthinkable in diplomatic terms. Yet, according to people close to the discussions, Trump wanted to talk energy directly. Not about tariffs, not about pipelines, but about control. Now, I'm not saying there's a signed deal. Nobody's confirmed that. But the timing of everything raises serious questions. Alberta's government recently unveiled what they called a bold new energy framework aimed at maximizing provincial control over oil exports. Just days later, Trump made a statement about working with reliable energy partners north of the border, partners who actually want to drill. That last phrase sent Ottawa into damage control mode. Because if that line was aimed at Alberta, it means the United States might be looking to bypass federal channels entirely. And for Prime Minister Mark Carney, that would be a nightmare scenario, an American president negotiating directly with a Canadian province, effectively ignoring the federal government's authority. But here's where it gets even more suspicious. Alberta's oil producers have been reporting unusual inquiries from U.S. refiners. Several companies were contacted about potential long-term supply deals with pricing models that assumed lower federal export fees. How could that be possible unless someone, somewhere, believed those federal controls might soon be out of the picture? It's almost like someone is preparing for a new kind of arrangement, one where Alberta answers to no one but itself. Now, let's think about the political stakes. Trump has been desperate to secure cheaper and more stable oil supply lines ahead of the next U.S. election. He's clashed repeatedly with OPEC, struggled with Middle East instability, and faced criticism over rising domestic fuel costs. A direct partnership with Alberta, one of the world's richest oil regions, would solve several of those problems overnight. For Alberta, it's equally tempting. Years of frustration with Ottawa's carbon policies, pipeline delays, and equalization payments have built up deep resentment. A deal with Washington could be framed as economic cooperation, but everyone knows it would be a massive step toward real autonomy. Still, the danger is obvious. If such talks were happening, and again, nothing's confirmed, they'd risk tearing apart Canada's constitutional structure. The Prime Minister's office has reportedly been in constant contact with Alberta's cabinet, trying to clarify the nature of their communications with U.S. officials. That's diplomatic language for, what exactly are you telling Trump? Mark Carney, known for his calm and measured tone, appeared visibly tense during his last press briefing. He refused to directly address any cross-border provincial outreach, but his message was clear: Canada speaks with one voice on international matters. That line alone tells us everything. It means he's worried there might be another voice speaking right now. But what makes this story so explosive isn't just the diplomacy, it's the money. Billions are on the line. If Alberta could sell directly to the U.S. without federal oversight, the province's revenues could skyrocket. Some analysts have speculated that Trump's team is exploring a framework similar to early 2000s state-to-state agreements that were quietly tested between U.S. states and foreign energy regions. They were never formalized, but they set a precedent. And once you open that door, it's nearly impossible to close. Now, pay attention to this part. It might be the most revealing clue so far. A senior U.S. energy advisor recently posted a late-night message calling Alberta the world's most underrated energy partner. The post was deleted within hours, but screenshots spread among policy watchers. If that phrase came from someone in Trump's circle, it suggests that these conversations might be further along than anyone in Ottawa wants to admit. Meanwhile, Alberta's leadership has remained deliberately vague. In a recent interview, the premier said only will always act in Alberta's best economic interest. When pressed about U.S. outreach, she smiled and said, "Let's just say Alberta has options." That single sentence sparked a wave of speculation. Options that include what exactly? Because if Alberta is seriously considering independent export arrangements, it would signal the biggest constitutional test in modern Canadian history. It's not just about oil anymore, it's about sovereignty. Trump, of course, thrives on this kind of disruption. His administration has made a habit of rewriting the rulebook. And for him, striking a symbolic deal with Alberta wouldn't just be about energy, it would be about leverage. Imagine being able to pressure Ottawa by holding a backdoor alliance with one of its own provinces. That's pure Trump strategy. Behind the scenes, Canadian diplomats are reportedly working overtime in Washington to reaffirm federal authority. One insider described it as a scramble to remind the White House who actually speaks for Canada. But so far, the silence from both sides has been deafening. No official statements. No denials. Just silence. And silence, in politics, often speaks louder than words. So let's piece this together. Alberta wants more control over its resources. Trump wants a reliable, politically friendly oil partner. Ottawa is being left out of key conversations. Add those three elements together, and you get something that looks less like coincidence and more like coordination. Of course, there's still the question of legality. Could Alberta even sign an energy deal without federal approval? Technically, no. But political reality isn't always black and white. If both sides present it as cooperative economic development, it could slip through a legal gray zone, especially if Trump decides it's worth the risk. And here's the most fascinating part. Nobody seems to know how deep this really goes. Some analysts believe this is just economic posturing. Others suspect something more strategic, perhaps even a framework for long-term energy integration between the U.S. and Western Canada. Whatever it is, one thing's clear: Ottawa's not in control of the narrative anymore. Trump has managed to turn a routine energy discussion into a diplomatic guessing game. Alberta, for its part, is playing its cards close to the chest, watching how far it can push before someone in Ottawa draws a line. And Carney? He's trying to keep a country together while its most resource-rich province flirts with the idea of going it alone. Every day that passes without clarification only adds to the mystery. Every vague statement, every deleted post, every sudden travel change, it all fuels the same question that no one in government seems ready to answer. Is Alberta preparing to strike its own oil deal with the United States? Nobody's confirming it. But nobody's denying it either. And maybe that's the real story here: the silence, the tension, the feeling that something huge is happening just beneath the surface. Because when governments stop talking and energy giants start moving, it usually means the deal, whatever it is already in motion. So keep an eye on Alberta. Keep an eye on Washington. And most importantly, watch what Ottawa doesn't say. Because sometimes, the truth isn't announced, it leaks out drop by drop, through the cracks of diplomacy, until it's too big to contain.